You know, we have all been following the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, who killed two protesters and injured another in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after Jacob Blake was shot by police. And yesterday, we're hearing that the prosecution really had a turn of events. A key witness took the stand. That key witness happened to be the individual who survived the shooting of Kyle Rittenhouse. And his testimony definitely was not in the favor of prosecution, because what is at stake here, what is being tried, is whether or not Rittenhouse actually acted in self-defense. And so the testimony from the only surviving victim might have played into this defense that Rittenhouse has been standing on, that he was acting in self-defense. What this key witness said was that he actually had a gun pointed at Rittenhouse first. And so many people on the jury may take this as him acting aggressively, or giving Rittenhouse a reason to shoot first. I want you guys to take a listen to some of the testimony from yesterday.
Gaige Grosskreutz was the only one of Rittenhouse's three victims who survived. Rittenhouse shot Grosskreutz in the bicep. He says he's now lost sensation in that part of his arm. While Rittenhouse's lawyers argue it was all in self-defense, Grosskreutz says his hands were raised when Rittenhouse shot him.
By re-racking the weapon, I inferred that the defendant wasn't accepting my surrender.
Did you feel that he was going to point the gun and shoot at you again?
Yes. I was never trying to kill the defendant. I was trying to preserve my own life.
But in cross-examination, Rittenhouse's lawyers tried to argue that Grosskreutz was pointing his own gun at Rittenhouse in that moment.
You'd agree your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse?
Yes.
Okay. Once your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, that's when he fires his gun. Yes?
No.
Sir, look, I don't want to...
That looks like my bicep being vaporized, yes.
Okay. And it's being vaporized as you're pointing your gun directly at him. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
You pulled your gun out. You began chasing or running after a man who was running away from you, correct?
That is correct.
When pressed, he said that he did not intentionally point his gun at Rittenhouse, but the defense seized. Also bringing up that Grosskreutz was suing the city and could benefit financially if Rittenhouse is convicted. So far, the prosecution has called 20 witnesses to the stand. It's possible that prosecutors could rest their case as early as tomorrow. Then it's the defense's turn, and it's possible that Rittenhouse himself could testify later this week.
So as you heard there, things did not go well during the cross-examination, at least not for the prosecution. Ben, we've been following this trial, and the thing that still just doesn't make sense to me, Ben, is that this was, at the time, a 17-year-old who came from Illinois with firearms to, quote unquote, help protect property. And so what I don't understand is, who authorizes people to come in from other states, from other cities, to help protect property? It's not like he had a friend who lived in Kenosha. It's not like his uncle's family business was in Kenosha. His grandmother didn't live there. This was a kid who simply just traveled from Illinois with firearms and kind of took matters into his own hands to be this vigilante.
Yeah, Georgia, the prosecution is going to have to start this conversation back where everything began, which is simply this: Kyle Rittenhouse instigated a situation by showing up there with a weapon in order to do exactly what happened. right? And if the prosecution is not able to draw that connection, then of course, in the confusion and all of the melee and all of the things that surrounded what happened in Kenosha that night, of course, it can all come out in the fog of war. There's a book called The Fog of War that discusses the types of things that happen in quote unquote combat. Well, why was there combat? There was combat because Kyle Rittenhouse crossed state lines with a weapon he wasn't old enough to be carrying in that state.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing I think that's concerning is in that state, there is a law for self-defense that says if you use fatal force because you are concerned that someone's going to use fatal force against you, it's justified. And so just in that one moment, out of all the days of this trial that's happened, in that one moment in cross-examination, the defense has done a pretty solid job of proving that because the only survivor had a gun pointed at Rittenhouse, that he was acting in self-defense. And so, you know, what is the reality going to be in America if Rittenhouse is excused for killing two people and injuring another when he had no business being in Kenosha, Wisconsin? What message does that send to our nation? When these things are happening, when there's a protest because someone's been shot or killed by police, right? In this case, we know Jacob Blake wasn't killed, but he was paralyzed, right? And so that community was responding to what they felt like was an injustice. And here's Rittenhouse coming in with his own agenda. He's not a part of that community. And not only is he coming in, he's coming in with guns. So what message does this send if this kid gets off on all charges?
That's right. It sends a message that you can get away with murder. You can create the scenario that murder is necessary. That's the critical point. The critical point is that this justice system has severed when it comes to whiteness and white so-called supremacy. This justice system is completely proficient at cutting off the responsibility of who created the nightmare in the first place. Who created this situation? And if Kyle Rittenhouse gets off, like you said, then that means that more of these incel, inbred, backwards bigots can go across state lines and create a scenario where they get to kill with impunity.
Yeah, well, we saw a case that it wasn't the same, but there were some similarities in Minneapolis. Kelvin Horton, who was a protester after George Floyd was murdered, was actually killed by a business owner. That business owner to this day there haven't even been charges brought up against him. Right. And so what message did that send in a state where there is not a law that allows business owners to use fatal force to protect their properties? You know, this was a man who clearly not only broke the law, but then also took somebody's life who's not being held accountable. And so I think that America's sending a message that, you know, yeah, sure, you have the First Amendment right, but if you're out there, don't be surprised if you're hunted down and killed.
That's right.
By someone who is not going to be held accountable, you know, so go out there if you want to. You know, I think these are the kinds of intimidation tactics that we continuously see formed against the movement for Black liberation.
That's right. That's exactly right. And we see it happening time and time again, Georgia. We have too many examples of how lives are just completely disregarded when it compares to property. Right. You have the right to go out and protest. Right. But if anything happens that someone doesn't like, then that person has the right to cross state lines like Kyle Rittenhouse. If something happens and property is destroyed, then your life can be taken. And that's the end of conversation. So this country is sending a very clear message. Property is as equal to the value of human life, if not greater.